Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to another SIGcast. This time we go into nationalist movements and unifications that were unleashed by, obviously, nationalism and liberalism that we saw really kind of culminate in the revolutions of 1848. That was the last, that 2 episodes ago. Last episode we talked about the significance of the Crimean War and the diminishing influence and power of the Ottoman Empire to control what goes on in Eastern Europe, as well as the West's attempt to kind of limit Russian expansion and Russian influence in the eastern part of Europe. So today we're going to see where nationalism takes us, and in particular the state of Italy. So what I'd like you to do right now is pause the presentation, and these are the notes I want you to take. These are only the notes that I want you to take for the unification of Italy, and then I am going to do my best to explain each and every one of these main points. So again, pause, and I'll be right back with you. Okay, now that you're back on the prow here and you have those notes, I'm going to make sense of those notes. So feel free, if you'd like, to add some of this material into your Cornell section of your notes. But I'm going to give you a little bit more detailed, account of how, in fact, Italy went through the unification process. So we need to start with the background. At the beginning of the 19th century, Italy was controlled, as we know, by foreign powers and divided into small kingdoms. Austria controlled the Italian provinces of Lombardy and Venetia, as you can kind of see here on this map with the oval. The Kingdom of Sardinia consisted of Piedmont, Nice, Savoy, and Sardinia. So this is the Kingdom of Sardinia, and it goes all the way from the island up into that particular area. So, again, Piedmont, Sardinia, you're going to hear that a lot. Parma, Modena, and Tuscany existed as independent mini kingdoms, and the Papal States were under the control of the Pope. So the Papal States kind of separated the north from southern Italy. Southern Italy was united into the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, as you can see here on this map. So in terms of the unification of Italy, you got to look at 1820 to 1821. If you think about the context of this is after the Napoleonic Wars. This is under the repression of Metternich and the concert of Europe. And there's something called the Carbonari that I'd like to introduce to you. The first revolutionary movements were begun really by secret societies. We talked about the Burschenschaft in Austria, and those were university students. The Carbonari, it's Italian word for charcoal burners in the north. They modeled their organization after the Masonic orders that were popular in the United States and France, across some of the Western European nations, and most of the members of the Carbonari belonged to, in fact, the middle class. And entrepreneurs, businessmen, manufacturers, merchants, they blended together in the hopes of breaking down trade barriers. You can see the liberalism there in terms of classical liberalism, and establishing a single currency among the Italian states. So, in other words, unify, and thus encouraging economic growth. This would be similar to what we'll talk about in Germany with the Zollverein in, Prussia, Austria, so on and so forth. So, again, as I said earlier, thus this was a very economically liberal movement. All right. An Italian peasant class, which had little interest in promoting trade or industrialization, failed to support the movement. The Austrian troops quickly crushed the Carbonari rebellion. And again, it was kind of similar to the peasants not supporting the Polish revolt. And, I guess I would probably also say that, again, in the French Revolution, the middle class led it, but they needed the peasants to do a lot of the dirty work, whether it was storming the Bastille or storming Versailles. And in this case, in Italy, they failed to do so. All right. And during the early part of the 19th century, there was something called a Risorgimento movement, or rebirth, resurgence. And this movement sought to unite Italy into a single country. And this was led by a guy named Giuseppe Mazzini. So 3 different government formats were proposed. One option was a Republican federation, the other was a monarchy, and the other was a constitutional monarchy. So some rallied under Giuseppe Mazzini and his Young Italy movement, which sought to improve the lot of the poor, sought to change the government through the use of popular referendums or votes, and he supported the establishment of a republic. Now, Mazzini left in exile in 1831 after the failures of the revolutions of 1830, when the promotion of his brand of Republican nationalism failed to gain popular support. Mazzini believed that the influence of the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, among the peasant class was really in Italy too difficult to overcome. The papacy, which feared loss of control over the papal states if Italy was to unite, openly opposed the establishment of Republican government and Young Italy and the Risorgimento movement. So they wanted to maintain independence and financial control. Thus, the Pope was not in favor of unification. In fact, they were adamantly opposed to unification and modern trends of liberalism and freedom. In 1864, Pope Pius issued something called the Syllabus of Errors, and it denounced rationalism, socialism, secularism, separation of church and state, and religious liberty. So the church was still trying to kind of cling to their conservative values. All right. And by the middle of the 19th century, two men were influential in the unification movement. And I introduce to you now Giuseppe Garibaldi on the bottom and Count Camillo Cavour on the top here. All right. Garibaldi was a popular military leader, and he developed his military skills when he fought in South American independence movement in the 1830s. In 1848, he led an uprising in his sweet red shirt, as you see here, which his forces fought against the Austrians and the French in an attempt to unite the North as a republic. Garibaldi's form of romantic nationalism gained support from the peasant classes, and he became a powerful independent force, he and his red shirts, as they were called. So you can see it here depicted. Now, Cavour was born into the upper class of the Italian Piedmont area of Italy and began his career in the army. When he was forced to resign his military commission because of his liberal leanings, Cavour became an entrepreneur and businessman. He made a fortune by applying new agricultural technology to his farms, and he became active in trade and banking. If you look here, too, he also looks like Mr. Copper before the beard. Just saying. A constitutionalist, Cavour's aim was to oust the Austrians and establish a constitutional monarchy, uniting Sardinia and Piedmont under the leadership of the House of Savoy. He tried to build a coalition of centrists and used his political connections to gain the position of prime minister in the Kingdom of Sardinia. Within the kingdom, he strengthened the economy and supported internal improvements such as roads, canals, highways, and railroads, so improve the infrastructure. Cavour negotiated trade treaties that favored the kingdom and reformed the banking system. He also tried to limit the power and influence of the Roman Catholic Church in Sardinia and Piedmont. And Cavour really proved to be a crafty politician, both home and abroad. He, too, is going to be manipulative, and he is one of the people that I would put in the same conversation as Bismarck and Napoleon III as a real politique or a real politician. The Kingdom of Sardinia fought on the side of Great Britain, France, and Turkey in the Crimean War. The formation of an alliance with France against the Austrians allowed Cavour to use French troops to force the Austrians out of Italian territory. The Piedmont Plombiers, or the Pact of Plombiers, guaranteed that if Austria and Sardinia, Piedmont went to war, the French would in fact support Italy. So he's trying to draw a coalition and make groups and isolate Austrians to get what he wants. This is a picture depicting that meeting at Plombières between Cavour and Napoleon III, 1858. The wording of the Pact of Plombières made it seem like the Austrians were the aggressors. And under the terms of the agreement, in the event of victory against the Austrians, Sardinia would gain Lombardy and Venice, while France would regain Savoy and Nice. The outcome would be a confederation which would unite northern and central Italy under the control of the papacy. Cavour then provoked a war with Austria, and so France and Piedmont went to war against the Austrian Empire. Again, he had manipulated the Austrians into attacking them first, and Napoleon came to the rescue. Napoleon was trying to gain favor and street cred at home of being, a big policeman in Europe. So in 1859, Austria attacked Sardinia, and the Austria issued an ultimatum to Cavour, which demanded that he stop encouraging revolutionary movements and suggesting that the Italians who were in service to the Austrians should desert. There were two battles, Magenta and Solferino. Napoleon III became nauseated by the gore of the war and faced harsh criticism at home from French Catholics who actually were supporting a declared enemy of the Pope. He then, so this made things difficult for Napoleon III, and the French were still kind of reeling over the death and devastation of the Crimean War. And at the last minute, Napoleon III made a secret agreement with Austria. And so Venetia remained with the Austrians while Lombardy went with Piedmont. Cavour resigned in a rage. Cavour's plans were saved by popular revolts and Italian nationalism. So while the war with Austria raged in the north, dedicated nationalists in central Italy had risen and driven out their rulers. The urban masses had taken to the streets and they shouted, "Italy and Victor Emmanuel. Foreigners, get out of Italy." The Italian states of Parma, Modena, and Tuscany, and part of the Papal states, had their governments collapse. The urban masses had taken to the streets, and they shouted, as I just said, "Italy and Victor Emmanuel, foreigners get out." They agreed to join Piedmont. So at this point, a large part of Italy became united. Cavour returned to power in early 1860, and people of central Italy voted to join an enlarged kingdom of Sardinia. Now, many Italians ignored the compromise of the peace between Piedmont, France, and Austria, and this is not what the great powers in Europe wanted. As I said, Cavour returned to power in early 1860, and central Italy, Cavour kind of achieved his goal with them overwhelmingly voting to join an enlarged kingdom of Sardinia. So the unification process was rolling here. Napoleon III allows this, but takes Nice and Savoy, and they remain with France to this day, though many people in these areas speak Italian. So by 1860, this is how Italy stacked up: a northern kingdom, a northern Italian kingdom, a papal states in the middle, and the Kingdom of Two Sicilies ruled by a Bourbon king in Naples. Cavour would have been fine to stop right there. However, super patriot Garibaldi was on the prowl. He was the son of a poor sailor who personified the romantic revolutionary nationalism of Mazzini in 1848. He was 17, and he went to Rome and joined the New Italy group, Young Italy, and he was sentenced to death in 1834 for his part in an uprising in Genoa, but he escaped to South America. So for 12 years, Garibaldi led a guerrilla band in Uruguay's struggle for independence, and he returned to Italy to fight in 1848 and led a corps of volunteers against the Austrians in 1849. Garibaldi and his nationalist army landed on the island of Sicily and captured the city of Palermo with only 1,000 troops versus a 20,000-man royal army. He then led his army up the spine of Italy towards Rome. He captured Naples, and thousands joined his movements. Next stop was the Pope's crib. He was about to attack Rome and finish the deal, but the wily Cavour steps in quickly. Cavour decided to use Garibaldi, realpolitik style. He sent Sardinian forces to occupy most of the Papal states, but not Rome, and he intercepted Garibaldi. Cavour knew that attack on Rome would surely bring France into the conflict and might undo all the successes that not only Garibaldi had done, but also possibly Cavour. He also feared the popularity of Garibaldi as a threat to Victor Emmanuel and the constitutional monarchy that had been established in Piedmont. Garibaldi decided romantically and just, kind of politique style, decided to step aside rather than seeing Italians fighting each other. Very honorable. So how it went down. Cavour controlled Garibaldi and had turned popular nationalism into a conservative direction. Remember, Garibaldi loved Italy more than himself and power. The new kingdom was neither radical or democratic. It was a parliamentary monarchy under Victor Emmanuel. Only a small minority of Italian males had the right to vote. There was a division between the industrialized north and the stagnant agrarian south. Italy was united politically, but divisions remained. So at this stage of the game, everyone in Italy was united except for Venetia and Rome. Venetia would join up in 1866 after helping Prussia against Austria in the 7 Weeks' War. And Rome was finally made part of Italy after French troops withdrew because of France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. And we'll talk more about that in an upcoming episode. So Italy's unification became complete. So I wanted to share this cartoon with you. I've seen it on DBQs over the years, but it's a contemporary British cartoon entitled Right Leg in the Boot at Last. And it shows Garibaldi helping Victor Emmanuel put on the Italian boot and finalizing Italian unification. And obviously, thank goodness for Italia and a little creative meme for you. Hope you enjoyed. Hope that explained the notes a little bit better and you understand how Italy became Italy. Thanks for tuning in.